Okay, welcome. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon in Cologne. It's 10 a.m. on Saturday, August 20th, 2022. Thank you all for attending and participating at the launch of our 2022 Virtual Coffee with Cologne discussion series, where we will host conversations about cultural differences between the United States and Germany through our contacts, members, and partners in Indianapolis and Cologne. The Indianapolis Cologne Sister City Committee is a nonprofit 501c3 fiscal agent, volunteer-based organization. Our Indianapolis Cologne Sister City Committee's mission is to connect people and places in Indianapolis and Cologne that create lasting cultural, educational, and economic impact. Today's discussion is entitled Differences and Similarities on Business Between Germany and the United States. Our invited and honored guest is guest speaker is Fritz Schroeder Senker. Thank you, Herr Schroeder Senker, for your participation and insight. Our moderator today is Hartwig Prusmann, the chairman of Freundeskreis Cologne and my counterpart for the Indy Cologne Sister City Partnership. We thank our committee for your continued support. Please see our Indy Cologne website at www.indycologne.org for more information on programs and membership. Please also see www.freundeskreis-köln-indy.de for more information on Cologne's programs and membership, which are similar but different websites. We honor your feedback and suggestions. We will start the talk shortly with Fritz and will last for about 20 minutes. We then welcome our audience to ask questions and make comments after that time. We end our discussion at 10:45 EDT and at 16:45 in Germany. Thank you all for your time. Now I will pass the mic to the moderator, Hartwig Prusmann, the chairman of Freundeskreis Cologne, who is also in Cologne. Thank you, Hartwig. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning in Indy. Welcome from Cologne, Germany, where the sun is shining and the level of the River Rhine is low, very low. Thanks so much, Melissa, for preparing and suggesting this new format of our Zoom meetings and providing, and thanks as well for providing the technical support. Everything works out well. And thank you so much, Fritz, for taking part in this first session. It's kind of an experiment. I can see 5 participants so far. Maybe we will be joined by more later on. Yeah, so without further ado, let's get down to business. German-American business and the misunderstanding. Fritz, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. So it's a great honor for me and a great pleasure to be with you today, particularly Hartwig, as I'm a new member of the Freundeskreis, right? Cologne Indy. So it's great that I can join that session today. Let me say a few sentences about myself. So I'm on early retirement right now, thanks to a good contract with an American company, by the way. And I was always working in corporate communications, among others, 10 years for Coca-Cola, mainly in environmental communications, public relations and governmental relations in Berlin. And after that, 10 years for the family-owned food company Mars Incorporated. You might know Snickers, M&M's, or Ben's Rice, or the pet food business of Mars. And I was head of corporate communications for Mars in Germany at public affairs VP in Brussels, leading the public affairs department for the European institutions for the company. So that's a little bit my background. I've studied political science, by the way. Before I go into the subject, I would like to make 2 pre-remarks. First, I'm not an expert in business culture, right? So I'm not a coach on that or something like that. So all what you hear is based on my own observations and my own experiences working as a German in American companies for about 20 years. Second, I think you would agree with me that when we talk about differences in business culture, there is so much more than what is based on national background. You can imagine corporate culture is an important thing, right? When you compare Coca-Cola, for instance, with a family business like Mars Incorporated, there is already a huge difference in that. And I will give you one example later. But it's also when you look at department culture, right? I worked in corporate communications. When you see marketing department and you compare it with technical department, there is a huge difference, right? How formal people are, right? When I worked for Coca-Cola, people in the technical department, they had to wear a tie. Within marketing, right? So I think more. There is also, I think, a generational change in business culture. So what you hear from me is what you hear from an old white man, right? So when you talk with someone who is 25 years, be it American or be it German, you would hear something totally different. And I will come to that later as well. But it's important to take that into account. And there's also a change of the environment for our business culture. I think what happened over the last 2 years with COVID, right, that a lot of business went to online. This has changed business culture as well. Business attire, right, but also punctuality, so business etiquette, other things. I think the last 2 years were a huge challenge for business regarding business culture. So having said that, let's go into the subject. So there's one thing where I would say there is a myth on differences between US and German culture, business culture, and that's about business etiquette. The example is punctuality. You might think that punctuality is something where Germans are very strong, and indeed, when I grew up, punctuality was crucial, right? Was crucial at home, being on time at breakfast, but later on in school, being on time was very important thing as well. And this is relevant for me till today. That's correct. But my strongest experiences on punctuality I had with Americans. So when I joined the family business Mars in 2007, 10% of my salary was based on punctuality. So I had to join the business of the office at 9 o'clock in the morning. That was in my contract. And this, by the way, was global contract for everyone, right? So I had to join the office at a certain time. When I came in later, I lost 10% of my salary for that month. So that was American, right? So that was American business. And I can remember when I was director of corporate communications for Mars Germany, I was part of the German chocolate leadership team. And so we always started our meeting on time. And when someone came in later, we had to pay €5 for each minute of a delay. But by the way, this was not invented by our German, by an American, but because the French was our managing director. So business culture is a tricky thing. That's come, right? And let me come with an anecdote of the Mars family on punctuality, by the way, so be it right or wrong. So what I heard was that a member of the Mars family, one of the owners, drove with his car and his wife to his office and the traffic realized he would come too late. So what did he do? He left his car at the traffic light and he left his wife at the traffic light. So he jumped to the office just to make sure that he came in on time. So that was the rule, right? So you can imagine how strict punctuality was, and that was American business culture. I would say this has changed even within Mars, because you can imagine, to attract a company for people, when you come up with rules like that, for instance, for marketeers, you will have difficulties, right, to get them. But that was what the reality in 2007 and after that, and that was the rule for people work for the company. So that was one on punctuality, but nevertheless, indeed, there are areas of misunderstanding, and you can imagine this is so broad, so I have to focus on, right? Otherwise, I could talk for hours on that. So I decided to focus on two areas. One is communication style. And Germans are perceived as very direct conversation, sometimes quite negative. I can tell you that's correct. So I have no problems. I had no problems in global meetings to say no. And also to come up with a negative feedback on something. What I would say was important for me, that this negative reaction was never directed to a person. So that was the rule, right? But was directed to a certain subject, and that is an important difference for me, right? When you are critical about something, but that's something which surprised my American counterparts at the beginning. That's definitely true. And it's also true that Germans have a tendency to come to a certain point very fast. And I was always very impressed by Americans, because for me, they are great in storytelling, in setting the scene in a perfect way. So that and start a conversation in a good way. When I say Americans are good storytellers, I think it's a little bit what, from my understanding, also it started in their education, which is different, a little bit different to ours, that you learn already in school how to present yourself in a good way. From a German perspective, I would say this is probably an overused strength. Right, which means the perception by Germans is, okay, Americans first sell themselves and then they sell the subject, right, the product. So that's a little bit the difference, I would say. So and could lead to misunderstanding. Also, I would say the impression by Germans about Americans, not only in business, but also business, is that Americans are good in storytelling, but they are not really much interested in others, right? It starts already with a famous question when you meet others, how are you? That's a famous point. When Germans hear that, in their learning, they would say, okay, now I have to tell how I'm doing, right? And they can spend 2 minutes on that. And that surprises Americans, right? Because they just want to set the scene, to have a good, positive environment to start the conversation. But the Germans really want to tell how they are doing. So that's a learning curve, I think, for both. And also that Americans have a tendency to go very first to say, okay, hi, Fritz. Let me to use the first name, where the Germans have the impression, okay, this is the start of a wonderful friendship. No, it's not, right? So it could be, but it's manage expectations, right? So that's something different as well. And the famous point for me, a learning curve for me, when I started with the first American company, with Coca-Cola, was on invitation rules. So when I went to Atlanta, and an American line manager invited us for a barbecue, And what he sent us was, okay, barbecue will start at 3 p.m. and will finish at 6 p.m. That was unusual, uncommon for a German. Yes, what you in Germany, you know, okay, the meeting will start at a certain point, but end is open, right? But I must say, I love the American way of an invitation, because I think you are clear about the time frame. You know what you can do afterwards, and you are, when you are the host, you know you will not get bored by people who cannot leave the party, right? So therefore, I love that American behavior. But for a German, it's a surprise at the beginning. And another one on invitation. So when you have a nice conversation, a nice meeting with someone, sometimes over a few days, and you finish that, then I had the experience from time to time that my counterpart told me, okay, Fritz, next time when you visit us, you have to visit me at home, right? So just come to me at home. But I'm pretty sure that my American counterpart, and for me as a German, the understanding is, okay, I have to come, right, next time. And for an American counterpart, it would be a surprise if I would be there, right, and ring the bell, like, oh, you haven't invited me. No, I'm there, right? That's not necessarily the expectation of my American counterpart, right? I think it's more, so what I love about Americans is, okay, they really try to create a nice environment for sometimes a very hard conversation, but to get that right at the beginning. And okay, Germans have to learn what it means and what it doesn't mean, right? So that was interesting for me. So another area, then communication style, there are more, right? Just in the interest of time, I would go to leadership style at the second point. So for me as a German, when I get instructions from my line manager, it's important that the line manager tells me what I have to do. And of course, I want to know the background, that I get it right. And I want to understand what is my deadline, right? That's it, right? After that, so it could be that I have questions, but Hartwig, you know me, right? In most cases, I will not ask questions. I will do my job, right? And I will meet the deadline. Yeah? When I'm good in punctuality, you can. So I heard from my boss in the American company, Fritz, your overused strength is efficiency, right? And be clear that efficiency, good in efficiency doesn't mean you are good in effectiveness. That's a different thing, right? So that was my learning. And so I had no problems. I have no problems to meet deadlines. So I feel quite confident on that. But I had the experience that my American line manager got nervous from time to time that he didn't hear anything from me anymore, right? Before I come back to him, let's say 1 day before my deadline, because he didn't know what the hell is Fritz doing, right? Will he meet the deadline? Does he have problems? So what is he doing, right? So why didn't he contact me? Why doesn't he contact me? And I feel relaxed about that, because I know I have a good feeling about the stuff and have no questions, or I'll find other ways to get the question answers. I don't need to go to my line manager on that. And this could be an area of, let's say, questions or misunderstanding, or sometimes even frustration, right? Because Germans have a different way, right, than how often and how to contact others on certain things. So there is less interaction, I would say, within a process. So then there's more interaction in an American culture. Also, Germans are sometimes frustrated about the amount of meetings and different sessions. That drove me crazy from time to time. Or drove Germans crazy, right? The meeting culture, where we say, okay, I want to do my job, right? So, and they didn't understand, and sometimes I didn't understand that the meeting is part of doing the job right, because you need to interact with others, right, to get a good result. where I said, no, I can do my job by myself, right? And meetings just will stop me from doing that. So that was something on communication. Sorry, on the leadership style. In a nutshell, I would say, and we can talk about other things, so dress code, for instance, right? So where I would say this is not a huge area of differences, business culture differences anymore. American were famous for being more informal, but Germans have changed that, and even particularly among younger people have changed that. And COVID, the tendency to go more to online meetings have changed that as well, right? So this is much more in business attire is much more informal now as well. Can be very within American culture as well. So I know, for instance, within Mars, coming back to that example as well, when there's a board meeting in McLean, Virginia, where their global headquarters is, and the family members are there, and the whole leadership team has to wear a tie for that, right? Which will not happen in Germany anymore within leadership team meetings. So it's really about corporate culture in that way. But I think so we are all much more informal now, and it depends on the branches. The IT business has really led to more informal way of working together, and even very formal German companies like Siemens have changed their corporate culture on that, because they know they have to change that just to attract themselves more for younger people. So there's a constant area of change. So to finish that in a nutshell, how to deal with differences. So my learning was, first, be transparent about that, right? When you have questions, uncertainties, talk about it. Don't keep it for yourself, because this will escalate the situation. That, ask questions. And also, therefore, also I love to work with within sister city sister organizations of sister cities. Be open-minded, be ready to learn, and see diversity as a strength. Therefore, I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to work in international and global teams, because how you grew up, right, is not the same how others grew up, and that you need to understand, right? There are different learnings, different ways how you look into a certain subject based on your own education. And when you get that right, then it's really great for team developments and for team results. That's what was my learning, and therefore I'm very happy now and working within sister city committees, just to keep the learning due to different cultures, right? Which is a huge opportunity for everyone. Thank you for listening to me, and now I'm happy to listen to learn your learnings and take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fritz, my good friend. That was excellent, and all these examples that you brought, that they made me smile a little bit. Perhaps you saw that, because I had similar experiences. Thanks so much, and I would like to take the opportunity to say hello to Heike, who just joined us, Melissa, and our other friends in Indy. Heike is the director or the president of the sister city ship with Barcelona, by the way. And I'm very glad that you join us, Heike. Hello.
Hello together. Eva Maria is also Cologne, Barcelona, sister city.
Great. Yeah, let's start. Let's dive right into it. Who would like to start to ask a question?
Well, I do have a few questions, if I may. Mr. Schroeder, Senker, thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear your perspective. first going back to the American, how are you doing question that you addressed. And you pointed out, which I have experienced with my colleagues in Cologne, if you ask that question, even though I've been with the company for almost 14 years now, I get a long answer if I say, wie geht's dir heute, or something like that. How does the German actually feel about that? I mean, I'm sure it varies from person to person, but in a societal context, is it an obligation that they just feel they have to answer that question in a detailed way? Or is it just a prompt that they need in order to open up a little bit about themselves, would you think?
So just call me Fritz, right, to make it easier. So my surname is a little bit tricky. So Fritz, I think everyone would be easy to pronounce. So I think there are, of course, there are individual differences, right? It's different than Americans would do that, because sometimes they don't even answer the question, how are you, right? It's just a given, right? So just jump to the next point. It's just setting the scene. I think what is an obligation for a German at least to answer the question, right? But it could be short. If you know your counterpart, right, from business, probably you would answer more. It's the first time to meet someone. It would be short, of course. And I know there are certain areas where Americans would not love to talk about. They don't need each other when they don't know each other. It's a religion, for instance, or politics, right? So it's similar in German. In Germany, I would say you would talk about the weather, right, for instance, or something which is easy to talk about. But you would say something just that your counterpart had the impression, okay, you have listened, and that you really are interested in your counterpart. That's the main difference, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And if I may go on, then that leads to the question of formality, which you also mentioned. In German, we still have the Siezen und Duzen. And in a business setting, of course, traditionally, everything starts with per Sie. And I think that's still the case. Americans don't have that distinction. We tend to make the distinction by using first name versus Mr. or Mrs. and the last name, to the extent that people do that. But I would say in almost all business settings that I have experienced, Americans are on a first name basis almost immediately, unless there's a very big disparity in, say, management versus bottom of the totem pole or something like that. Could you speak a little bit to how that is presently done and developing in Germany, the aspect of formality? I've noticed that within my company, people are per du, even with the management, very quickly, but it's a 70-person Mittelstand company that's family run. So that may not be representative of the larger companies that you have worked with. So the question is, maybe you could speak a little bit to how formal do you need to be at the beginning, in the middle of a relationship, a business relationship, when you're doing business in Germany? And has that changed significantly in the last, say, 10 years or 15 years?
Yeah, I would ask others to jump in as well, right? Just to start that. I would say this is an area of change, definitely. I know from my wife, for instance, who worked for the German Telecom, that so they have changed that culture a lot, right? That that you don't use Sie anymore, third person, right? That you just say du. And it's a little bit a generational question. I would answer that question, right? I know that elder people sometimes it's comfortable to work, and I know that example of teleconference as well, that elder people sometimes feel uncomfortable when they feel pressure from the corporate culture to change their behavior. just to be more international, right? To say you do to everyone. You can imagine. So when someone is 55 years old, and the expectation within the business culture is that someone who is new, 25 years, now can say Fritz to you, right? And you are not used to it. It can be an area of conflict. Or it can make you uncomfortable. So that's a generation. The question, of course, is a question in which company, in which branch you work. But in general, I would say there is a more international style. The same with business attire, where we are more informal now. You say you. And of course, sometimes it's a mixture. It's interesting when you have Germans and Americans together. I had that during my Coke times. When you are global meetings, global VCs or TCs, everyone would use first name. But after that, when you talk with your German colleague, you would go back to the surname, right? Or saying Dr. so-and-so, right? So this was a little bit crazy, right? Within Coke, for instance, right? And when this is the reality for, I would say, for months after a while, you would see that doesn't feel right. That your German colleague as well. But this can take years sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I mainly wanted your perspective because, of course, we all know that everything in the end is personal. How do you connect with the person you're working with, regardless of what position they hold? Sometimes things click and it's easy to become friendly, and sometimes things remain more formal for whatever reason. Another fly in the ointment, if you will, is that I think many Americans that do business in Germany, they don't speak German or speak very little German. And that forces the German side to speak English, because certainly in business and technology, almost every German has a working knowledge of English, as opposed to many Americans who have no interest in foreign languages at all. And so that maybe makes things a little uncomfortable for the German side, because if you're an older person like I am, and you're used to the du and sie and keeping some social distance through that mechanism, it disappears when you're dealing in English language. So I would think that might be a possible source of discomfort or unbalancing for the German participant.
It's true. And it would be good to talk about that, right? Just to be aware that for people, for non-native English speakers, it's a little bit a challenge. It was interesting thing. I was in a global public affairs team for Mars, and we had people from China, from Russia, from Latin America, from the Near East in this team. So we were a group of 8, and only one or two of the 8 were American or English native speakers. So therefore, it was quite easy to talk about that as a challenge for everyone. Okay, it can be there can be a solution to when you have that awareness to spend more time, right? Because okay, when you need to think, okay, how do I want to say that in English as a non-English speaker, you need more time. And it would be good when the whole team with Americans or English natives are aware of that they give the people from who are not from the US the time to think the subject through before they come up with a comment. Otherwise, 80% of the conversation, 70% would be Americans, right? Because okay, for them they can think about that much faster. So it's good to have that conversation because then okay, Americans give someone from Germany, for instance, or from other countries a few more seconds, right, just to come up with a point, not always to jump in there first. Awareness is key here, I would say.
Mhm. And if I may, Hartwig, one last maybe a point and a question. So Germany is a very large country. Yeah, the culture in the north of Germany is quite different in many ways from the culture in the south of Germany. I'm originally from Austria, so the southern Germans, I understand where they're coming from. Sometimes the people from the north, not so much. But all of these sort of business etiquettes and business mental approaches that you're speaking of, in your experience, would you say that they are fairly uniform throughout Germany, even though there are regional differences at the personal level? Or would you say even the business culture varies noticeably between the different major regions of Germany?
I wouldn't say Germany is a large country. It's a tiny country, right? When you compare it with China or the US, it's always okay. Do you compare it with Austria or do you compare it with the US, right? then you look differently into that. But of course there are differences. I myself, for instance, I'm born in Bremen. That's the northern part of Germany, and that's different to Bavaria. Certainly, right? So the northern Germans, and there is difference between people coming from New York to people from Georgia as well. I learned that when I was in the US for business reasons, that there is a huge difference also to understand the English, by the way. Yeah? When you talk with people from Georgia, it's a little bit a challenge for Germans to understand that dialect. But the same with Bavarian German. For an American, I can imagine if they speak German. So the Northern German have a tendency to reflect more. They need more time to come up with thing, where there's people from South Germany are more open, right? Are more open also when you are together in a restaurant, you sit together, where someone being from Northern Germany prefers to sit to sit alone, right? And to make friendship took longer when you are from Northern Germany than when you are from the southern part. I would say in that sense, probably Bavarian are a little bit more American style than the people from Bremen, right? Or from the northern part. It's also based on history, right? And different things. But in the end, it's a small country. And when you work in an international company, I think it's relatively easy to adapt to that business environment. More important, I would say, is really corporate culture. Yeah, and corporate culture, I think it's the same in the US as in Germany. Corporate culture can be very different. It can vary from company to company, and that has a big impact on how you behave yourself, right? But this can also be reflected on areas. So which area you come from, right? Is this a company with a strong DNA from the northern part, or from let's say California or East Coast, or is it from Indiana or Idaho? I think it's a huge difference, right? Also for the corporate culture in general. But it depends on which level you work. When you are part of an international team, you learn more about cultural differences. When you are on factory level, for instance, on local level, I think you know less about that, right? And then it's a bigger difference sometimes to deal with a different culture when someone owns the company from with a different national background.
Thank you, Fritz.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions from the others, perhaps?
Yes, I want to like to add something from a view of a scientist. if I'm allowed to. And I like the discussion, and I like your last question, Reinhold, about Germany and the different areas. And I think that's the issue today, because for intercultural scientists, it's so hard and so difficult to describe cultures and describe countries or national cultures and describe people, because due to the globalization and internet, the cultures get more and more equal or similar to each other, and we can't make differences. And it's as we speak we in the intercultural theory we don't speak about culture A and B. We speak about fuzzy cultures, because cultures they are blurring, melting away, fading out. And so I like this discussion, because on a glance, if you have a look on Germany, it's a small area. You can see there are a lot of similarities, and there are some universal aspects or elements, like, for example, time perception, or direct speak, or fact orientation, and such things. But if you are zooming in to an individual or to a company or to an area, you see differences. So the zooming in, maybe there is a German raised up in Bavaria, but he or she was studying in China, and she or he is in a band in Alaska, and so on. It's blurring, it's melting. So we speak of fuzzy cultures.
Right. Actually, I have so many different experiences, because I was in my personal career, I was programs director for German-American Youth Exchange for 40 years or even longer. And I have experienced the strangest things in cultural misunderstanding, even if those kids came from the US. And there's this very famous scientific essay, the publication, that states that there are 14 different cultures, so to speak, within the territory of the United States of America, depending on where the immigrants come from, and other things as well. Thank you so much, Eva, for making that statement. That is very, very important, and probably we will hear more about that during our next meeting. Okay, Melissa, do you have a question? From your experience, you lived in Germany for quite a while.
Well, I was making some notes because I thought it was really interesting, all the areas that you were covering in such a short time. I mean, the communication style, Fritz, that you were mentioning, and punctuality, and being paid for punctuality. I think that's really interesting, not just on a corporate level, but also on another level, because I also worked, for instance, in when I was younger, also in restaurants, where they would say, you come on time or that's it, you know? So that was payment. It wasn't necessarily a percentage, but that could make or break your job and your money, of course. So I thought that was really interesting to think about. Also, invitation rules. That's something that, since I've lived in Germany, has been always a struggle for me here with events, because Germans will always tell me whether they're coming or not. And even when they are typically, whether they'll show up late or not. So they'll say, I'm going to be there, I might be late. And oftentimes in corporate culture, I'd say more people apply that in jobs, but sometimes, and of course, in corporate culture here, you're expected to say whether you're confirm meetings or not, you know, even though what I find too is that depending on where your rank is in the company, you can show up later than others. So I think that's also an interesting thing I noticed here in the United States. Whereas in Germany, I felt it, at least that I experienced more, even on an educational basis, more punctuality. And you talked about leadership style, also interesting about questions versus not questions, productivity versus non-productivity. very interesting. Like, is our talking taking not productive, or is it productive? That I think is something that in corporate culture here, I find sometimes that people will tell a lot of anecdotes or stories that are interesting, but I always think, what's the item? How does this cover the item? And I think, is that just me, or is that from being in Germany for so long, are we doing our jobs right now, you know? But one thing, I suppose, we're at time, that I think is interesting here, and maybe it's just a comment rather than a question, but we learn here etiquette. We even have in high school here something, it's called, or in middle school we have, what's the class called? We learn to cook and we learn etiquette. And I don't know, I don't think that's in Germany that way, but so they'll teach us like continental and how to eat. And I remember sitting there and learning it. And one of my questions, and I suppose we can then maybe anyone can comment on it, and then we can wrap up, and I can also stop the recording, and we can have a few minutes where we chat. But one thing, we learned etiquette, I can't remember, it's called home economics, I think, in middle school. And we learned continental, and that was what kind of Europeans do. And then at home, I learned etiquette from my parents, like how you're supposed to sit at the table. And then my grandparents would come and tell us how. And that, and then sometimes now I see in colleges as a university instructor that they also teach business students now etiquette. And I've even heard of companies hiring out people to come in to teach their lawyers, for instance, how to eat, how to have a business dinner. And I thought, wow, I mean, because they're trying to get some uniformity. And I wondered if that's something that you do in Germany, or if it's common to also have that type of education, or is it expected that as a professional, that's something you learned from being in Europe or from your family, or is that something that companies also teach their employees, or if they learn it in any part of the education system or of their education, K through 12 or 13 in a university? Can anyone comment on that if they learned it?
From my experience, I think it differs from one company to another. So I remember my first company, it was my second company where I worked for. It was RWE, Energy, working on energy. So it was in the 90s. And so we did business in corporate communication there, and we did business, or we started business as a German company with France. And before we went to France to talk with French managers, we had a session with a coach on different cultures between different business culture between France and Germany. So in some cases, so this working on this business etiquette is quite old, right? So what companies are doing when they start international business, and I know that China, for instance, was a big thing, right? Because the culture is so different. Before a business started, I know that from German companies, before they start business in China, they really spend a lot of time for their managers. It depends a little bit on the management level, right? But when there is interaction, a regular interaction with counterparts from other cultures, then really, I think international companies would do a lot right now to work on business culture, just to get that right, because you can lose business, right? If you get it wrong. And I thought about that. I asked my former colleagues working in American companies, or still working in American companies, for their examples about difference between US and German culture. Interestingly enough, they couldn't answer that question. Or it took time for them to answer the question. I don't know, is it not right? Because I thought, okay, when they cannot answer the question, then obviously it's not a big thing for them, right? So it's a more challenging question. Okay, what's the difference between Asia and the Western world, for instance, culture? On the other side, even between Netherlands and Germany, neighboring countries, you can get it wrong, right? So therefore, I think business, it's important within business, at least for people interacting with other cultures a lot, to work in a profession. International companies will do that, I would say, on a regular basis.
Thank you. That's so interesting. I think there's so, obviously we covered a lot in a very short amount of time, and everything we're talking about we could go on and more about how these differences affect business and how we are learned, I think is also very interesting. But thank you. Thank you, Fritz, for your insight and your experience. I think that we can conclude. We're a few minutes over time, and for all of you that want to stay on for a few more minutes after, you're welcome to, and we can chat. But I want to thank Fritz so much for your insight. It was great to hear you talk, and great to hear about the companies you worked for, and thanks Hartwig for your work and setting up this and inviting Fritz and the topic suggestion. It was great. Our next discussion, our Coffee with Cologne virtual discussion, will be with Dr. Eva Becker, who is also a guest here today, and it's scheduled for Saturday, September 17th at 10 a.m. Please look for my invite and register. And you can email me with any questions or comments at melissamhobson@gmail.com. And then, yeah, I'm your host, Melissa Hobson. Thank you for moderating, Hartwig. Thank you everyone for showing up. And I'll end this recording and we can chat maybe a few minutes longer.
Thank you very much. And hello from Cologne, Germany.
Thank you.
So when I can, so I would like to add that I love that format. And it's a huge opportunity, right? You might